From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Chung, and this matters.
Be open to experience, be willing to try new things, don't have a rigid plan, accept random acts of hospitality without judgment or fear. Don't be afraid to wander, don't be afraid to eat a bad meal. You know, if you don't risk the bad meal, you'll never get the magical one.
That's the late, great Anthony Bourdain, chef, writer, bon vivant, and irrepressible traveler. I love that quote from him because it captures so much of why we love to travel. To challenge ourselves, to see new sights and experience different ways of living. But that feeling of escape, of hopping on a plane to a faraway place, we'll dream of when we can do that again. Traveling is one of the first big disruptions we had during the pandemic. You've probably had your summer vacation, business trip, or travel plans crushed in some way this year. COVID-19 continues to spread. Borders remain closed. Airlines are suspending flights and laying off tens of thousands of workers. The way we travel, and more importantly, how to do it safely, will change forever. What will it look like for the next couple of years? We're talking to travel writer Sarah Khan. Her work has appeared in the New York Times and Condé Nast Traveler. We'll look into the crystal ball of what the future of travel looks like and how this moment changes our expectations of travel. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start off this episode asking you a personal question, which is for someone whose job it is to travel for most of the year and then obviously write about it. What has it been like in the middle of a worldwide shutdown to actually sit still for a moment?
Honestly, it's been pretty nice. And I say that with a little bit of a caveat because I actually started this year needing a bit of a breather. I think I did some 100,000 miles last year around the world, and that's kind of been my lifestyle for the last several years. So I actually went into 2020 thinking, you know what, the first 3 months of the year, I'm not going to plan any trips. I'm going to just lay low. So this was it was nice because I guess there wasn't any FOMO at the beginning. Like, we're all in this together and I was kind of getting the time I needed. But now that we're entering the fourth month, I think now is when I'm really starting to feel like, okay, this has gone on a bit longer. So I initially didn't have any trips planned until April, and I had a few things planned for April, May, June, which I was okay with. But now it's starting to feel like, it's been nice getting back into cooking and working on other writing projects and reconnecting with people in different ways. But I would love to be back in the sky soon.
Yeah, this is not a natural state for you to be in one place for so long.
Definitely.
So let's talk about the now then. And I think we're all dreaming of where we could go, what we could do for our summer vacations. What do you think is actually possible and safe right now?
So I think that's actually an interesting question because right now, I think, is this pivotal moment where things are starting to change. If we had this conversation a month ago, it was definitely going to be road trips, road trips, road trips. And I still think that is the case for the summer. This is definitely going to be a major road trip renaissance this summer. People going wherever, as far as they can drive. If they want to pick up an RV, they might even go even farther. But now this month specifically, we're seeing with July 1st, the European Union is lifting travel restrictions. And July 7th, I think Dubai is planning on joining that. Tunisia, certain countries like that have already gradually started opening up in June. We're seeing a lot more of this news of travel bubbles in certain regions of the world where it's making it easier to travel within those regions. How that affects Canada and to a far lesser extent the US is obviously different than, parts of Southeast Asia and parts of the Pacific region. But I do think this month is when, if people really, really do want to get on a plane, those options are starting to be made available. But with that in mind, there's also a lot more restrictions and a lot more fine print that we're all going to have to read. RVs are apparently already sold out for many weekends this summer. There's even a luxury sector emerging in RVs where there are companies that will bring you and deliver you land yachts, as they're calling them, to and you can even have a driver hired to take you on these, and they go to luxury RV resorts and things like that. So I think there's definitely a lot of different things happening at different levels of luxury and price points. But yeah, if you are up for a trip, most likely this summer you will be renting a car, taking your own car, renting an RV, and going somewhere remote and Also, I think one thing we've been seeing a lot of is people are looking to book private homes and Airbnb type accommodations as opposed to hotels where you might be mingling with people in hotel lobbies and things like that too, where possible.
So people are thinking of traveling in sort of outside of the box, things that they regularly might not be doing most summers, like that RV trip or, that long road trip. Those are the main things that we can do right now.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of that really boils down to control. And if you are taking your own car, then that's already a space that you can control how you sanitize it and who you welcome into it. So I think right now there's a lot of anxiety around travel, and that is the easiest way to start kind of gradually getting back out into the world for a lot of people.
You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but when it comes to international travel, we have to think about many roadblocks. Even as we are starting to see some staggered reopenings, there's still a lot of restrictions. There's different safety standards from airlines and businesses. How long do you think before we can seriously consider international travel? And what do you think that experience, even over the next year, pre or post vaccine, what do you think that could look like?
I think it's one of those things that it's really hard to predict. And I've had this conversation month to month, and I feel like it's changed so much month to month in the last several weeks even. All we can say for sure is that it's a fluid situation. And even, for example, the European Union, they're going to be reassessing every 2 weeks which countries might be added or removed from the list of welcome travelers. So really what this means for travelers is we just have to do a lot more legwork. And I think especially, certain countries like the US and Canada and parts of Europe, we've been accustomed to a level of passport privilege where we can just pick up and go anywhere at short notice or many places at short notice without too much thought. And I think that is definitely not going to be the case for at least a year or two, with or without a vaccine, because we're going to have to constantly be looking at where are we welcome right now? What are the restrictions in those countries? Because even, for example, the European Union, Italy is still requiring quarantines for people. So you still have to see within these general regions, what are the specific rules country to country? What are the tracking mechanisms that those governments might have as far as if they need you to wear some sort of bracelet or use an app? What are the different testing procedures? What are the costs associated with those tests? And then on the flip side, what are the restrictions on the way back? I believe Canada is requiring a mandatory 2-week quarantine if you do return. Right. From these places.
The whole purpose of us discussing the possibility of having a bubble of sorts between us, a safe zone of travel, would be so that you wouldn't have to have a quarantine attached. I think everyone would acknowledge that it would be prohibitive.
So there's just a lot of fine print, and it's also going to be very fluid. So we're going to have to check, just because you book a flight for August or September or November, who knows what it's actually going to look like closer to that date. Also, another thing is going to be, people are going to be very familiar with their airline policies, with the cancellations and change fees and travel insurance as well.
You wrote this really interesting piece in Vox, and it was titled, "The Era of Peak Travel is Over." And it's about how this idea of how we traveled, and in some cases maybe over-traveled. I'm guilty of this too, traveling for the gram, thinking about like what kind of pictures you're going to get. Your argument is that all of that is over. Why do you think that is? And what do you think it'll be replaced with?
So it's not necessarily that it's over. It's just over for now and for a while. And I think when I reported that article, a lot of it was much more vaccine dependent. So a lot of the experts I spoke with back in March and April were saying it's over until there's a vaccine, and who knows when there's a vaccine. At the moment, what's a bit encouraging, I guess, is that we're seeing people are gradually starting to find ways to work around traveling without a vaccine. So it still will start coming back. But again, this spontaneous, I'm going to go somewhere for the gram, do what I want, go however I want, do crazy things. I think that carefree spontaneity is what's over for anywhere from 2 to 5 years at least. And I think what that really means is the way we were accustomed to traveling in February 2020, we probably won't be able to do again for several more years. And what that really means is that there's just going to be a lot more awareness and consciousness as far as, like I said, a lot of us have been privileged with our passports. And now we're seeing, at least in the US, where I have both American and Canadian passports. And right now I'm really wishing I had the Canadian residency to go with it because, I know that I probably, as Americans, based on how we've been managing the virus, we probably won't be welcome in certain countries for a while. And I think hopefully what that will do is make us more appreciative of the trips that we can and do take and make us much more conscious travelers. And we're going to have to do a lot more homework and research, which is probably good because it'll help us be more aware of how different countries and cultures are managing different things. And I think, one thing that we need to also realize is this isn't just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis. So even if things were to rebound and go back to normal in terms of coronavirus in a year, who knows how long the economic impacts of the situation might linger for people and whether they might even be financially able to travel the way they've been accustomed to as well.
Right. That within the global travel industry, they're expecting to lose hundreds of millions of jobs. There's a lot of jobs that are on the line, and as well, there are people who have lost jobs who can't travel.
And I think that's one of the things that this crisis is making people realize is how important the travel industry really has been. I don't think that in a lot of ways it hasn't been seen as the formal entity that it is, but there are estimates that 10% of the global workforce is employed by tourism related endeavors. And this goes from, airlines and hotels all the way to farmers that are supplying the meat for a hotel or, security drivers at various establishments. There's just so many communities that are entirely dependent on this, and people are going to be reeling for a while, sadly.
Your piece also wrote about how, in some respects, we have been over-traveling, that there is over-tourism in some places. The UN predicted that by 2030, we will see 1.8 billion arrivals a year, which is roughly about the number of tourists that are traveling around the world at any given time. And I think about major sites like the Eiffel Tower. Anybody who's been there can tell you how packed it is, right? And that the picture that we see in the postcard is not exactly the experience that you see when you get there. Do you think that this is a moment of almost a course correction in how we've been traveling?
Definitely. I think, like I said, as we're becoming more conscious travelers, at the same time, we're also becoming far more aware of things like density in locations and what impact our over-tourism is having on not only places, but also on ourselves. And so I think, we're already seeing people are going to prioritize more remote regions in the near term. And, there's a lot more camping in national parks. And then also, even as we do start gradually getting more comfortable returning to cities, I think we're going to see a lot more second cities and third tier cities that are becoming more popular because people are starting to spread out more. Just generally, people are going to veer towards, or at least I hope, more meaningful trips where it's not just about the checklist and doing as much as you can and packing in as many things as possible, because just out of concern for both your own safety as well as the safety of the people that you're going to be around, you might not be interacting that much, not be doing as many train trips from place to place and those cheap EasyJet flights from country to country, and actually focus on spending longer, more meaningful periods of time in one place and really immersing yourself there.
I want you to look into the crystal ball here a little bit and sort of wanted to look into the future of travel during this period and the businesses that are involved. So let's look at it, airlines, a central part of how we travel. And in some ways, it feels like they have some of the biggest conundrums when it comes to traveling during this period. We're in an enclosed space on a plane. We're there for hours at a time. We're mingling with people from all parts of the world. What kind of new advancements and protocols are we already seeing from airlines to try to sell to us that they're doing it safely, and potentially what could we see in the future?
I think for a long time, the entire airport experience has been a germ festival. And I've always been somebody that's carried my own sanitation supplies and wiped down everything I could. And it's pretty filthy. And I think across the board, we're going to have to see a lot of different sanitation regimens implemented. But I think airlines are getting the full extent of our focus right now. And just the entire, from the TSA security bins as you're going through and how many different people put their shoes in and their laptops and everything, to all the different touch points and things you have to touch through the airport, through actually the proximity and the way the planes are set up. I think everything is getting a really big overhaul, or at least a close assessment now, which probably hasn't happened at this scale. And I think even though travel across the board is going to be changing, that's definitely what people are noticing more. And that's the first step of travel for many people. So they're going to be kind of easing back into it, they're going to want to see that their airlines are taking these concerns seriously. So I think something that's interesting is there's a lot more technology that's going to be deployed throughout this entire system, whether it's more robot cleaning tools that are used to go in places before people actually go in, coating kiosks in some sort of disinfectant so that they're self-cleaning before you even get there. And just as far as how much more seriously airlines are taking the actual cleaning process between passengers. But at the same time, it's a risk, and it's a risk that everyone needs to decide for themselves how much they're willing to take, because there's only so much you can limit how close you are to another passenger when you're in a 14-hour flight with limited air circulation. And I know that they're looking into improving everything that they can across the board, but at the end of the day, nothing is going to be foolproof.
Certainly until we get a vaccine. What about hotels? I've read that privacy, personal space, cleanliness, these are all going to be very prized things, obviously, whenever hotels really start to reopen again.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing hotels are taking this very seriously in terms of figuring out social distancing in a lot of their spaces. I know it's this interesting time because there's been this trend towards hotels as social halls. Hotel lobbies were being billed as these great places where people can interact, and now everybody's going to have to rethink that. And in terms of, cleaning schedules and things like that, people are going to want places that they can have some control over. So that might mean in some cases not having turn down service and certain things that we've gotten used to having, in, especially the luxury hotel experience, because travelers themselves are not going to necessarily want that many people coming in and out of their room. And I think, Airbnb type accommodation platforms are also an interesting space because for travelers that aren't comfortable with busy hotels and elevators with a lot of people, they are going to probably be turning to, these sort of private homes that they can come into, spend an hour, everybody take a different room, scrub it up to the way you feel comfortable, and then they can just spend the rest of their trip without thinking.
When we look at major events in our lives, I think about how they transform the way we live and the way we travel, especially. Take a look at 9/11, for example, right? Privacy, security, that became utmost importance. Personal comfort, at least in travel, that kind of took a bit of a backseat. We had to jump through a lot of hoops now. That changed how we travel for good. How do you think that this pandemic will affect the way we travel once again for good?
Well, I think we're going to just get used to a lot of different things that we probably haven't been used to. We've become very impatient, but now we're going to have to be used to waiting a long time while things are cleaned up before us, whether it's the passenger in front of you in the TSA line taking an extra moment to scrub down their bin, or if it's an experience that we've signed up for, cleaning all the equipment between different travelers. One thing, though, that I feel like we haven't actually stressed enough and that I think is going to be pretty pivotal for this and just in general is I hope we're all become very aware of how our actions affect other people and other countries and other destinations. Because a lot of what we've spoken about is how are we going to make travel safer for ourselves. But I think one thing this virus has made us acutely aware of is that even when we've done everything and we feel fine, we could still be vectors and bring this disease to other people who might not be affected yet. And I think we're going to have to be very conscientious when we make travel decisions, not just about what we feel safe doing, but what's right for the community that we're about to go into. And that's one of the regional travel, I think, is going to have to be very important for a while. And just things like that, where we're thinking about other people, thinking about long-term impact. And that's just, I think, something that should be critical part of being a part of civilization and part of a global community. One other thing that I hope comes of this is, we've spent the last few months isolating from other people and sort of having to be in this mindset where you need to be in your own little bubble and separated from people. I hope that then translates to when we do start venturing out more freely again, we reconnect with people at a much closer and more meaningful level because we appreciate that human touch and human interaction. But I think just as far as like specific things, we're going to have to get used to less privacy in a different way. Some countries are going to require downloading an app that tracks your movements, perhaps when you first arrive. And there's going to be a lot more testing happening at different entry points. We're also just going to have to get used to perhaps inflated price points on things because all these different changes and new measurements that we expect our airlines and our hotels and our tour operators to implement, that comes at a cost to them. And, they can't just put all that, especially in the middle of an economic crisis. So we might see some of the experiences that we've come to take for granted as being affordable and accessible as suddenly, adding a few extra dollars to our bill.
Sarah, we began this conversation with sort of a personal question for you. I'm going to end it on a personal question too. Whenever all of this ends, whenever you can really travel the way that you traveled before, get back to your job, where are you going to travel?
Everywhere. No, that's actually not true. I think it's actually made me think a lot about where I want to go, how I want to go. I know that the first things I want to do are definitely playing it by ear, going somewhere. I did a road trip to the Jersey Shore this weekend, which is a place that I never had seen myself going to in my past life. But I just did a day trip. So that was my way of sort of easing my way in. And I sort of took into account New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut are kind of considered a little bubble of our own. So I felt that that would be responsible for me to stay within this region. Next trip will be, I want to visit my parents in Massachusetts. Missing my family. The first flight I wanted to take was going to be California to visit my brother's family. But now with the way things are going there, I feel like that won't happen for several months. So the trend that you'll see is like just personal connect. I want to go visit people that I've missed for the last few months. And I think that's going to be the priority for a while. When it comes to going overseas, honestly, I can't really tell you that right now because I don't think I'll be comfortable traveling overseas anytime before the fall at the soonest. And I'm just going to be playing it by ear and seeing how things go and going to places that I think I won't be bringing anything to that particular country or community by coming as an American traveler.
Sarah, thanks for peering into your crystal ball and safe travels whenever we can do that again.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's Sarah Khan, travel writer on what the future of travel looks like. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Chung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Mudhar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.